Hi, I'm Joel, a white kid that grew up in Indonesia. I'm interested in the unvarnished look, an examination of the driving force for art. In this series, I'm going to explore the relationship between places, the place you leave to the place you go, and the place that develops in between. That third space can be a strange and wonderful fusion, a hybrid for creative magic. These conversations will hopefully develop a composite picture of a third culture artist who has straddled multiple worlds and how that influences their expression through art.
Get comfortable, Joel. Cross legs or not. Just down. It's all good.
I think this is better, yeah.
Huh?
Crossing legs is always a bit weird, so yeah.
It's but it gets like my leg starts to go numb.
If
after a
you
while.
don't cross them.
If I do. Okay, well, welcome to Third Heat the show.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to start these things, to be honest. But
Guntaj Singh was born and raised in Punjab, a state in India that's rich in culture and art. He grew up surrounded by it. Punjab is famous for its lavish lifestyle, almost to the point of showmanship, and that informed his cultural experience. There are many reasons why someone would immigrate to Canada. His was impulsive and driven by the fantasy of living a certain kind of life. And while it wasn't easy, Canada allowed him to dive into his creativity as an artist without some of the hindrances he may have faced in India.
what challenges did you face that maybe different from if you had stayed home, back in India?
Like, what would have been different if I had stayed?
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things would be that when I moved here, I was always making art and in that realm of making art and being a creative person. Mm-hmm. Moving to Canada allowed me to really dive into it.
Right.
Whereas in India, I wouldn't have been able to dive into it because outside of the fact that I was in a sort of a repressive environment when it comes to sexuality.
Yeah.
I think I was also in an environment that didn't necessarily believe in living life as a creative person.
Right.
So it was becoming another hindrance, and I felt like I had to explain that to many people around me. And I don't think I'm labeling India as just a regressive country like that. No, there's many successful creatives that come out of that country every year.
Right.
I think it was my individual situation, and I think what I felt like I was surrounded by.
Right.
So that decision was so rooted in that, and it was also impulsive, not because of the fact that Canada felt inviting, but in a certain way, me making that decision, now that I look back at it, was also this worldview that I had in my head, you know, where sometimes you don't realize certain things about the country that you've grown up in until you've gotten to a certain point in your life.
Yeah.
You know, you're almost getting to know your country as an entity itself as you're growing up. You know, so many things you don't know about your own country. So
And some things that you grow up with that you think are just normal. You go somewhere else, and then that's not normalized anymore. So then, I can imagine having a different view of where you come from once you go back and realize what you've gained in one place that you wouldn't have had in another.
Like I went to India recently, and I think one of the biggest realizations was that I didn't get to explore my own country growing up, you know? So that itself also was a huge factor in that decision that I made, because not seeing or being exposed to certain things and only growing up, or my only window to the outer world, or my only realization of this life exists was so solely based on movies and books and not necessarily real life, you know? And again, that's what I mean by saying that the whole situation was so individual to me.
Like being a tourist in your own country.
Exactly. And now that I look back at it, if I had moved to a bigger city in India, somewhere else, I would have probably done something similar, but I just didn't know that was possible because of my mindset and my worldview.
Cool.
And I'm really happy that I moved to Canada, because I think I wouldn't be here today having this conversation.
Yeah.
And looking back at it, it definitely helped me it became such a big catalyst in my journey as an artist.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything leads to you being here now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
But even after 5.5 years, he still feels some disconnect from Canadian culture. They say it takes around 7 years to get to the heart of a new culture, and he still feels some unease of not being fully rooted. So while his decision to move to Canada may have been impulsive, it was also rooted in a desire to explore beyond the confines of his own experiences and to embrace the freedom to live his life as a creative.
Tell me a little bit more about your different art disciplines. Let's start with what got you into being a creative in the first place. I think it was probably more visual art.
In most of my childhood, I was more drawn towards like drawing things and making replicas of things around me. And I was good at it. I think I was a patient kid.
Yeah.
And you
Have
know,
to
when
a
you
little
have,
bit.
yeah, if I was patient, I enjoyed the escape that came with, you know, trying to perfect something that you see in real life, then putting it on paper. I think at a certain point in my life, I definitely lost like this hope of like, you can make something bigger out of this. And then I moved here, and I wasn't necessarily planning to do something. There was no like formulaic thing going on in my head where I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna go to these spaces and become an artist.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think I was doing that. It sprung out of my experiences here. You know, you move here as an immigrant and you're so engulfed in one, trying to make sense of the world around you.
Yeah.
Second, making sure you're paying your bills and
Yeah.
sustaining yourself and
Yeah, right.
surviving.
Yeah, it's a slog.
You're new to this place and you're figuring so much out. So for a while, I didn't make any art, but then I found myself in my life at a certain point where I felt very emotionally deprived and very, I wouldn't necessarily call it a dark place, although I think I was close to a dark place. But yeah, I felt very emotionally deprived, and I felt like something inside of me was craving for this expression that came from an uninhibited place, you know. And it started like that, like with me again, literally just randomly one day being like, I think I'm gonna draw something again.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So that's really how it began. And then everything that was happening to me in this country, it was a shock. And at a certain point, everything was coming to me as a shock. And I was realizing how much I don't know about life. And
Talk me through that culture shock a little bit when you're done with.
Okay.
Yeah, the culture shock thing is interesting. to
yeah,
me.
I think that the culture shock was for me more to do with the life that I had seen in India. I just feel like I grew up in a part of society which was this certain echelon. It was very heavily influenced by the notion of community and family and society. So I think when I first moved here, the isolation was a big thing for me. And I think I saw that in the way the city is also fabricated. Like, it's not just
Yeah.
me, right? There's so many immigrants here.
And there's a similar story. I've heard that story many times.
Exactly.
It takes forever to feel less isolated here. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think I was seeing that a lot around me, and going through it and seeing that a lot around me was influencing me way too much. And that's what I mean by saying it. I felt emotionally deprived.
Yeah.
I felt like I wasn't having honest conversations enough.
Yeah.
And there's nobody. I mean, there's no blaming really. You know, it's like it's the whole thing really sort of springs out of a decision that you've made. You're moving to an entirely different country.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to put up with this initial torture of
Yeah.
doing things yourself
Yeah,
and
yeah.
trying to make honest relationships.
Yeah.
And you know, it's brutal.
Yeah.
Especially when you're not as socially experienced, you
Sure.
know.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. But like,
Yeah.
now that I look back at it, I don't think I was, you know.
Yeah.
It all just started with, like, as I told you, like a random evening. I started painting and drawing again. I started putting it out there. Social media was a big thing.
Yeah.
It allowed me, you know, for me to just express myself and not necessarily think too much about it, you know. But then social media became a catalyst, and it all sort of happened very organically.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, your question was about disciplines. So mostly visual art.
Yeah.
And that's how it began. And I still practice visual art. And I still think that I'm in the midst of figuring out a lot of things as an artist. I think that I don't ever want to be the kind of artist who thinks he has figured it out and then just like does that for the rest of his life.
Right.
I think I always kind of want to keep challenging myself and playing around with different mediums.
Well,
Right now I'm sticking to visual
Yeah.
and film. I'm trying to. I've taken a few acting classes.
Yeah.
I've been in some films, short
Yeah.
films,
Yeah.
art films in Vancouver. Yeah, so it's mostly visual media and film.
Do you find joy in the creation of things?
It's the most profound thing I have experienced.
Yeah.
Being able to create something.
Yeah.
I don't think that anything surpasses that, for me in terms of an experience.
Yeah.
It could be anything else, like, in life there are so many things that you can do that make you feel a certain way. And I think also after a certain point in life, if you are an artist of any kind, you just get to a realization, or like not even a realization, almost like this weird, at least it has happened with me, where I find myself looking at everyday life and the way my life unfolds almost as a work of art,
Yeah.
So you have to, I think you have to approach life as a work of art to be able to enjoy creation. After initially struggling with the idea of what being an artist means in this world and what is a successful artist and what makes you a successful artist, you kind of get to a point where you're like, I think the most important part of this entire thing is actually the creation, and everything else kind of becomes secondary after a while.
I know you do photography.
Yes.
So talk me through a recent photography set that you did. I think I saw it in your apartment. Talk me through that project.
Okay. That project for me is definitely one of the most special projects that I've worked on till date. It was also my first major photography project that I worked on. Everything else prior to that in terms of photography was very experimental. I was trying to like get to know what photography is, how I can play around with it. I was struggling with the idea of being able to present or bring to life something visual that's in my mind.
Right.
And I wanted to bring it to life in a very accurate, precise way. And I was struggling how to do that through a medium and not reduce it.
Right.
So I think photography is definitely one of those mediums outside of film, which can really, because it's moving images, so you can really just bring everything to life. But I think after film, photography does the magic for me in the sense that if I have a vision in my mind, I can really bring it to life by placing objects, having a human subject in the frame. Whereas doing that in a painting or a drawing sometimes can be a big challenge, especially if you only make a certain kind of art.
Sure.
So I think that photography comes in over there for me, and I just started playing around with it. And the series that I did, it's called Sareyam, which is an Urdu word for kind of doing something very openly and unapologetically.
Okay.
It's not exactly the translation, but that's the closest we can get with it.
Yeah.
There's a very like flowery, sort of like decorative tone in that word. So it is unapologetic, but in like a very poetic way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that series was more about it was about romance and love, and I think that growing up there was certain things that we learn. I learned about love and what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And the more we grow up, the more we start to realize that sometimes things like love, which doesn't necessarily already have a definition, can't be put in a box.
Yeah.
So, what about the kind of love that doesn't fit into that box or doesn't necessarily, follows this like system that we expect everybody to follow, I guess.
Yeah.
So I was trying to challenge that through that series, and I wanted to just make or bring to life some very intimate moments, or some very intimate, but also some very not so ideal moments of what it can be like to be in love. And I had these images in my head that I was living for so long, living with for so long, that just kept floating in my head. And especially in the cultural, socio-cultural aspect of like where I grew up, I think that becomes a huge part of my artwork a lot of the times.
Yeah.
Where like a certain emotion or a certain feeling and the way that I felt it growing up is just so not how I feel about it anymore.
Okay.
So I think questioning that or challenging that through art is a big thing. So yeah, Saryam was about that. Everybody on that project that I worked with was, somebody that I'd met along the way in Vancouver. I think that was the most beautiful part of the project. Everybody that I knew and thought would be willing to do be a model for me, and reaching out to them and just being like, hey, do you want to do this? And this is what I expect. And, it was, most importantly, it was a very beautiful process.
Yeah.
And in the process, I got to know everyone that I worked with in such a different way, even if I've known them for years.
Cool.
I saw a side of them that I just didn't know existed. And they, I hope, got in touch with a side of themselves that maybe they knew existed but never expressed. So yeah, because they're not professional models, they're just folk that I know. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah. So
if you're doing like intimate portraiture like that, with like, you don't need models.
Yeah, you don't really need models. I think there's something very, exactly, you don't really need professional models if you're trying to just evoke emotion,
Right.
real human sort of experience through photography.
One thing I do want to know more about is how you got into mural painting.
Okay, mural painting is something, it's really like, I don't even know how, that's the real answer to that question. My first mural that I did was this temporary mural, which was up at Van Dusen Botanical Gardens for a month and a few days in 2019 during the festive season, during Christmas season. It was a very Christmassy mural.
You've gone on to other things now, right? Because you've done some for Vancouver Mural Fest.
Yeah, I did Vancouver Mural Fest, which was in collaboration with the Punjabi Market Regeneration Collective. Again, I'll never forget that experience. It was 11 days of complete chaos, but the most beautiful chaos that you can imagine. And it was, coming from Punjab and painting a mural in the Punjabi market in Vancouver, and painting a mural which is so culturally influenced by Punjab was just a dream come true.
Closing the circle a little.
Yeah, it just felt like, at one point, it felt very unreal and very surreal.
Right.
And I was like, this is happening. And I'm painting
That's really
a mural.
cool.
Yeah.
That's a really, must be a gratifying experience.
It was.
Yeah.
It was gratifying, feels like an understatement. Like, I'm telling you, it just felt very surreal. I had to like pinch myself on several occasions. And I think the most beautiful part of doing that was the relationships that I built with, everyone who owns a business in the Punjabi market, seeing them every day, having conversations with them, and realizing how this city has evolved, or that specifically Punjabi market has evolved over the years. It used to be known as like Little India and things like that.
And like you being from Punjab, and then being in a little Punjabi microcosm in another country.
It was, it really was a full circle.
Yeah.
And I felt so blessed and so lucky to be there in that moment. It felt like, I don't know, it made me believe in a certain side of life. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it was amazing. So those are the only two murals that I've actually really painted. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a muralist, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I can paint a mural.
Yeah. I mean, you can.
Yeah.
You got the painting chops.
Yeah.
Cool. Want to talk about acting?
Let's talk about acting.
All right, let's talk about acting. All right, so you and me have had lots of conversations about like film and filmography in the past, and a lot of our the things that we really seem to relate on are sometimes obscure cinema. But yeah, you've been dipping into the acting world, and you have completed at least one short film.
I've done 2 short films.
2, okay.
Yes, and I've actually done 3, but 2 of them are done, and one of them I like produced and directed.
Okay.
Which was kind of like an experiment, but kind of like on a whim.
Yeah.
Had a moment, decided to make a film myself, type of thing. My first ever experience on a film set was in an alley on Granville Street.
Yeah.
And there was this, I have to say this, like cinema and films, if cinema did not exist, I would not be who I am today. Like,
Right.
as I was telling you earlier, a lot of my like, this world exists out there was very like coming from movies, you know, because not having traveled enough or like, it was very strange. And like, I was going out of my way to make sure that I was watching movies and that I was sort of exposing myself to, you know, films from all over the world. I was doing that on purpose.
Yeah.
And I think it sort of became this like, almost like this savior for me. So cinema, like I put cinema on a pedestal almost. I'm just like, cinema's God, you know? Anybody who makes good film, I'm just like automatically, you know, you know? So I think that this fascination with film and cinema really sort of led me to look for opportunities in Vancouver when I was a student. You know, I was looking to make some extra cash. I was like, I don't mind some extra cash while being on a film set. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I ended up on this film set for this film which was set in the future. The plot was something along the lines of like, you need like energy to survive, and you need to go to like a station to get charged. You know, one of those things. Yeah. And they were paying like I think $50 an hour or something, and it was a 4-hour shoot. So I was like totally down for it. You know, you don't make $50.
Hot diggity.
Yeah, I was like, you don't make $50 an hour as a student in Vancouver, you know? So I was just happy to be on a film set. And I remember being there for the first time in my life, being on a film set and realizing what it takes to make a movie. Sometimes I was on set not even as an actor. Sometimes I was just like assisting, you know, like literally just being that person who like puts things away or, you know, stuff like that. It was a high, a different kind of high, and
again, like a closed loop again for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I never not want to be a part of that world, you know? I think about it all the time, and I'm like, people are like, well, is that your, like, what is your first love? And I'm like, in a certain way, cinema is my first love, you know? Cinema is where it all sort of began. So if I was to really pinpoint it and say what made you fall in love with life and art, it is films.
There's a short phrase in Indonesian, harum manis. Sweet smelling as a literal translation. But to me, it means something more encompassing, aromatic and comfort wrapped together. Conversing with Guntaj is just that. Like the first whiff of coffee when you wake up, aromatic and comforting. He's a bit of a Swiss Army knife creative, and being one myself, I feel like we connect on similar planes of thought. I'll leave you with this.
You can't always fit in as an artist. You know what I mean? Like, there's
Embrace the chaos a little bit.
Yeah, like there's this quote by James Baldwin where he says that you have to force the world to deal with the idea of you and who you are as an artist. You're not going to make art that's always going to be in line with what the world expects of you.
Yeah.
You know, and I stand by that. I'm going to give up on certain things in my life to be able to make art that I want to make, you know. There's not, and I am gauging different things when you're an artist, you know, success, money, all these things that are also important in life. There is so much possibility in the future. I think that up until now, as I was telling you earlier, that I feel like there's a part of me that's always gonna feel like I'm figuring things out. And I kind of almost wanna be in that state of mind. But also a part of me is realizing that I need to have a body of work that even if it's different media, and even if it's different channels and different funneling of my emotions in a different ways, I have to make sure that it all comes together in a very poetic, beautiful way. Hey, hello, is it good?
I think we got most of it, but let's get some sound bites. I want some sound bites. Sound bites.